thermodynamics in Switzerland?
Right. Thank you. It is my pleasure and my challenge to address such a distinguished group of people. Most of you sharing this firm belief that on the Kondratieff cycle, in fact, not only something which other people far away on the real world have doubts that it exists, but in contrast, many of you not only believe on the cycle, but they give precise characteristics, numbers, durations, the end, the third, the fourth, the fifth cycle, the beginning, the end. Like we know it very well. In fact, it's not only your belief that is common amongst you, it's also common that most of you have this economic background. Well, I'm making an exception because in a previous career I was a physicist and I tried to look at physical quantities. Physical quantities is weight, pressure, volume, temperature, something you can measure quantitatively in an objective way. Price is not the same, it's not this category, because price is speculative, and not only because it might be inflation, which often is corrected more or less, but because the speculation in price can go very far. I mean, a painting of Van Gogh is worth a fortune today, and when he painted it, it was not worth very much. So in the meantime, none of the physical quantities of the painting have changed. So if you stick to physical quantities, they are sort of invariant and they also measurable in quantitative way. They are objective and you can trust them to last for a long time. So from this point of view, I would really try to draw on laws of physics, measuring things other than dollars and prices and indices, rather than physical things, act more or less like a physicist in order to be able to talk on the same subject and see what conclusions we get. But another difficulty I had today was that as I kept hearing speakers presenting things, as I kept reading some of the material that was circulated ahead of time, I kept changing my presentation. So by now, it's very different than what I was planning to do. So, but I still think that there are at least 3 new points I have added. I will point them out as we go in. But let me start by the original title of my presentation, which was the human behaviors during the different phases of the Kondratieff cycle. And I will make a little bit of a review of natural growth, familiar to everybody. Natural growth is S-shaped logistic growth that obeys a very strict law, which says the rate of growth is proportional to the amount of growth achieved, and at the same time proportional to the amount of growth remaining to be achieved. I just told you a differential equation in words. And this differential equation is the bell-shaped life cycle curve. When you solve the differential equation, you get the S-curve. So every S-curve has a bell-shaped rate of growth that's associated with it. All this is high school. Something that you also know is that this differential equation I just described to you has an equivalent in discrete form. And what's interesting is, while the top one gives rise to the S-curve, the bottom one gives rise to chaos. So there's an intimate link between chaos and natural growth. That is, if you discretize the differential equation, you get a discrete form, and then you solve to get, well, respectively, S-curves or chaos. What we did with a colleague mathematician, we did computation of this. We first solved the differential equation, we got an S-curve, and then we made that discrete. And again we got chaos, but we got chaos both before and after. Not much difference. I mean, the only reason I'm saying all this is because I'm trying to get to the point that when you have S-curves, you expect to find chaotic behavior at the end of the curve but also in the beginning. It's not always because the cascade, so the squeeze between chaos periods. But if you take this large-scale graph, which plots energy, consumption of energy per capita, worldwide consumption of energy. That's the pink line, starting from the mid-19th century. Just a simple graph, no manipulation whatsoever. And then you see there is the first step, which is S-shaped, one growth step, natural growth process. There is a stagnating period of about 20, 40, 30 years. There's no growth, but there's a lot of chaos. Then there's a second S-curve. And then again, I stop here because that's when my first book was published. Now, my second book shows what happened, and you see that those dots came very well. One of the success stories, I have lots of them. There's also a big picture of energy. There is the energy substitute each other in the background. Here it was wood, charcoal, oil, and nuclear, and all of them coexisting but evolving. That's not the issue. The issue is the consumption shows that we go through this cyclical behavior, and at the same time, we see the succession of S-curves and the interchange between somewhat regular and chaotic periods. Now, we said we do expect chaotic because as we approach the ceiling. Now, sustained growth can be expected to go through these phases. Order, chaos, as you go through the steps. And of course, how close or how far apart are those curves? I have studied, just because it was very interesting for the company I was working for at the time, how often to bring the follow-up product. And I said, if we take these life cycles and we move them right and left, and we try to match into a sine wave as close as possible, sine wave because it's harmonic, because it's again a very physical, then we find that the optimum is when 1.4% of the beginning curve overlaps with 92.7% of the finishing curve. These are details, what it amounts to the title. This is a harmonious cascade of natural processes. And I underline the word harmonious and the word natural because even though they're used in their ordinary sense, they're very strict, rigorous mathematical definition behind it. Natural means growing proportional to the amount of growth and proportional to the amount of remaining growth, differential equation I showed you. And harmonious means displacement proportional to the force that's causing it. That's the harmonic oscillator in physics. So we can talk ordinarily and still be quantitative and rigorous behind. And the conclusion is that when you have a cycle, for example, Kondratieff cycle, you can interpret this as successive growth steps on some other variable that has the tendency to grow, naturally speaking. So if I go back to my energy consumption and I try to fit a growth pattern, it's not very easy to fit a growth pattern, but you fit a growth pattern that would be a super S-curve, the ceiling of which is somewhere up in the ceiling, the ceiling is of the ceiling, then you find this deviation below, above, and below, and above. And now, if I extract the deviation from the trend, I find a cycle that goes up and down, and which reflects energy consumption worldwide with no manipulation, just presentation. You see that, now one can say this is Kondratieff cycle, because when you consume energy, you're working, you're doing something, you produce, you sell, the economy moves. So this is one-to-one linked to many economic variables. There may be some delays in between, I don't know exactly. But it's interesting to see that it has been going up and down and up and down. And I don't know whether this corresponds to your numbers of first, second, third, or whatever. What I want to point out is that here we are worldwide. First of all, the frequency comes out to be 60. The best match between the sinusoidal gray strength in the data is 60. And we are right at the rock bottom of the trough. I did exactly the same analysis for American consumption only, and it's right here. But US energy per capita consumption worldwide is, I had the data go a little bit, actually the same period, but it showed the first peak is here. I have two sets of data here, total primary and electrical. Well, one is correlated to the other very strongly, but the argument is that now, again, that's where my first book stopped, and this is the update, and you see we are well upwards for this phase. And of course the cycle here, the period comes at 56. Now, what does that mean? That America is pulsating in a different, worldwide? I don't think so. I think that this is a measure of the error, of the uncertainty we can expect on establishing parameters for the Kondratieff cycle. Here, I will tell you why I believe Kondratieff is a global phenomenon and cannot be in one country only. But for the moment, here you have 60 years of period and just at the bottom of the curve. Here you have 56 years period and well on the upside. This you take as two extremes, probably not the extreme extremes, but two extremes of determination error. What in physics we call them uncertainty, error of measurement. So we have to talk in terms of 7%, I would say plus or minus 5% if you want, as an error of the period of Kondratieff and of where we are at the present. You see, this is pretty rough already. I mean, it's not so accurate as, even though what I'm measuring is very precise. Per capita energy consumption worldwide in tons of coal equivalent per head. This is all measured, there's no ambiguity behind it. There's no speculation, no inflation, none of this stuff. And yet, we find an uncertainty which is sizable and which, by the time you want to subcut this into sub-cycles and go down to a cycle of 7 or 5, an uncertainty of 6 years and a cycle of 5, I don't know what it is anymore. But let me, so this is the first point I'm deviating from my presentation. The second point I'm going to add as a new element to what I had planned to tell you is skimming through, not skimming, but looking through Google on Kondratieff and finding interesting pages. I found one site devoted to Kondratieff which argues very strongly of the shortening of the life cycle. In fact, systematic shortening, they estimate how shorter the next cycle will be. That doesn't surprise me, and I would expect it. But I have no evidence, neither on this graph nor the previous one, nor on a much longer graph. This is the longest graph I was able to get my hands on, which is going back to the 16th century. Price index. Unfortunately, this is an index because no physical data go that far. It ends up with a period of 55.2 years, very consistent with the energy consumption period, and it shows no particular. The data has been smoothed by a rolling average type of technique, but this is caution. There's nothing to be blamed on. It shows no particular drift or narrowing. I mean, over 10 periods or 7 periods here. 8, 9 periods, you would expect if there's a shortening to show up. And I don't see any shortening yet. By the way, now this raises the question, what cycle are we riding now? The 4th, the 5th, the 7th, the 8th? Starting from where? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7? And then, the last point I want to address before I start the presentation is on the question of origin. All kinds of theories and speculation about, and most of your suggestions come from economics, innovation, triggers, cycles, and so on. One has to be careful about cause and effect. In cyclical behavior, cause becomes effect, and effect becomes cause, and we don't know whether it's the chicken or the egg that came first. And if one is before the other, doesn't mean that it caused it first. If A precedes B, you can never say that A caused B. The only thing you can sure about is that B did not cause A, because that would violate causality. But other than that, you cannot say anything about causality. So, 20 years ago, I was talking to Cesare Marchetti, and he suggested to me that it's all climatological, he says. There's a climatological cycle. And he has a couple of reasons that I'm not going to present, he will be able to present. But I have 4 other reasons for which I think there is a strong link to climate. Here is something that I have never seen anywhere else. It was first published in my book, is a variation in sunspot activity which shows a strong correlation with the gray line is the 56-year sinusoidal cycle of energy consumption. Except for it's missing a whole bit here. And I have no way to figure that out. Again, there's a smoothing average because this is yearly data. Every 11th year there's a spike. But if you have the 56-year moving smoothing average, then you end up with something like this. Again, after my book was published, and all these data show what happened in the last 15 years, and you see the pickup of the other rising edge. And I say this argues for a long variation of
People call it ecological economy. The sunspots is the only appearance.
Well,
then you get to manufacturing, which is normal depending on the sunspots.
A sunspot can influence the climate. I think that is almost, yeah. So that's one argument why there may be a link to climate. Another argument is something I studied a couple of months ago. A lot of hurricanes going in the world, and somebody asked me to, and I looked at, and indeed the hurricanes have been rising in the last 150 years. And if you take only significant hurricanes defined as category 3 or higher, just the pure number of them every decade, you see the fluctuation is very big. It's been rising, but again, the variation around the rising trend is regular, and this is the 56-year cycle, and to my mind, there is a strong correlation there. Now, hurricanes and sunspot activity, they're independent sources. It may be linked, but it's not the same thing. I have 2 more geo-climatical, what I call, arguments. One is something you are familiar with, the cycle of Saros, that is identical solar and lunar eclipses every 18 years, 11 days, and 8 hours. And the point is that, but those are not visible at the same place. If you have the cycle of Meton every 19 years, the same lunar eclipse will occur at the same time of the year. You combine the two, I'm driving at the fact that the smallest multiple that will give you the same eclipses visible at the same time of the Earth is 56. And that is accurate to 500 years duration. And oddly enough, the Stonehenge has 56 years around. Stonehenge has been famous for being some kind of astronomical observatory, particularly for eclipses of the sun and the moon. And then there is a periodicity of 56 years in tides. In Monaco, they have archives of worldwide tides, and I was able to find in there periodicity of 56 years. Well, these two may be linked because orientation of astral bodies do provoke tides on the Earth. So, but there's 4 practically independent geo-climatical arguments pointing at a variation of around 56 years that may influence the climate. As I was telling you, Marquette has a couple more. And there's a book by this guy who argues that climate influences business. So I don't know whether it's true or not, but here we can have a link between cycles observed by economists and something which is much more fundamental and which is forcefully global. So it cannot be different for America only and for the rest of the world only. And again, it's not no proof. It's just evidence that comes in and makes you think and wonder if there is a connection. But now I want to enter my topic of today's presentation, which is human behavior during the cycles. Because, as I said, Kondratieff, like every cycle, if you take one period, it has a rising phase, maximum phase, a declining phase, and a minimum phase. And of course, to the extent there will be another one following, it picks up again, so that a long wave like this can be cut up in cycles, to which I attribute the seasons for the sake of poetic description, having the low growth periods as winters, the progressive rise as spring, the high rise is summer, where the living is easy and the profits are high, and the declining is fall, and then I try to find the characteristics, how do people behave in this, how do companies behave, what's the best suited behavior, what's the most normal, natural behavior that will minimize difficulties, so that I will go now through several slides giving you aspects of human behavior during this, and then we'll talk about wars and aggressivity also. But fundamentally, the seasons of natural growth are assigned, as I told you, in fact, quantitatively, are equal durations. I make them of equal duration. Parentheses. Somebody was talking to me this morning about the Russian 80-year cycle. Well, if that was the case, this is a winter of 20 years. There will be 20 years of rise and 20 years of peak again. I used this model when I was challenged once about who could ever predict the fall of the Berlin Wall. And I got so upset about this, which is against the principle of going back and predicting something you know. And I said, it could have been predicted very easily, the fall of the Berlin Wall, because the cycle is symmetric. The Soviet Union decayed from 1917. It reached a peak in 1957 exactly. And why I say exactly? Because when Gagarin went up, when the Sputnik went up, the rest of the world was taken aback. That is, the Soviet Union was at its peak at that moment. From then on, even 3 or 4 years later, you could see that you went over the peak. In 1963, with the events of Cuba and so on, in 1969, when Americans go to the moon finally and the Russians do not make it, already, that is 63 and 69, we know that the peak is behind us. So if the beginning is 17 and the peak is 57, 40 plus 40, at 97 is the end. 97 is the end, but several years before the end, you have the so-called chaos coming in. So several years before the end, there should be a big spike, chaotic time. Several years before 97, you have the fall of the Berlin Wall. This prediction could have been done in 63, as soon as you realize you're over the peak. Now, it's easy to say now, but what I'm saying is that Russia is in a big winter, which will last about 20 years from the beginning, which was, let's say, the Berlin Wall, or later, the 97. But let me not change the subject. I'm going back to behavior. Behavior in the spring is hard work ethic. In the summer is success. In the fall is the environment, loss of market share. And in the winters is chaotic. The morale corresponds. In the summer is comfort, boredom, decadence often. In the spring is hope, excitement, elation. In the fall is denial, blame, and in that sequence. And in the winter is frustration, anxiety, confusion. I will go fast with this. I usually do this with company executives, because they're not exactly the audience here. I point out here that winter is the time of fundamental change. That's when you plow the field. Re-engineering, reconsidering, redesigning. This happens in the winter. Summer is fun and games. Spring is learning. Fall is teaching. You know, somebody teaches late in his life, learns when he's young. The forces in the summer is top down. That's the vertical organization, stovepipes. In the winter is the opposite. It's horizontal organizations, segmentation, bottom-up forces. You cannot control them. The people that have the word. In the spring is value-driven. In the coast is in the fall is cost-driven. Here you tighten the cost. Here you invest. These are dictating now how you behave towards products, and I'm not going to go into these details. The economy is prosperity in the summer, obviously, depression prices in the winter, recession in the fall. Finance, profits in the summer, low inflation in the spring, high inflation in the fall. Trial and error. That's what you try. In the winter you try. Now, there's an argument, innovation, for example. Let's go faster. I wanted to talk about innovation because the winters, because of the difficulty of the environment, people become inventive. Sparrows and foxes become entrepreneurial in the winter. They go, the birds come and tap on the window to get their food. In the summer, they go lazy and the food is easy to get. So winters motivate people to do things. So it's not surprising that a lot of the innovations come in the winter. So here's an argument to say that innovation is not the one that trigger the economy, but the bad economy triggers the innovations. One can argue that way. I'm not necessarily what I'm saying, but that fits with a profile of a winter behavior. As far as prices go, if you are a company that's doing well, Microsoft dictates the prices are vendor-driven. They can put any price they want. You're stuck with it. You have to buy it. But if it's in the difficult times, the price can be below cost because it's driven by the customer, and the vendor can do nothing. Well, in the spring, you base it on the value. In the fall, you are very worried about cost, so you base your prices on the cost. So this is the behavior of pricing. There's a big controversy in the business world about TQM and BPR and all these jargon words. And there's a new guru every time with a new thing to do. And benchmarking, Six Sigma, I don't know. And all these things, they're thrown into poor executives. Not all so poor. But sometimes they get confused, these people, and they start doing, I remember digital, the last days when the company was in trouble, they were doing everything at the same time. Every time they would hear something, let's try this, maybe it will save us. Well, you don't do anything at the same time. Excellence is good. Nobody can argue against excellence. But excellence by excellence is good in the summer. That is, you don't do excellence in the winter when it's chaos. You don't do excellence even in the spring when you first bring out the product. It's not excellent. It will be excellent later on. The fundamental change must take place in the winter. And it does take place there. Benchmarking is in the fall when you realize that you're not doing something quite right. You look at others and you say, what are they doing? And then you correct. But if you are deep in the winter, if you go down there, by that time you have to change. You cannot correct anymore. So there's a classification of all these jargon words, and everything has its time, which is more appropriate. Human resources. Well, we have entrepreneurs, obviously, in the winter, specialists in the spring, generalists in the fall. You want generalists because you want to start creating new ideas and so on. And process agents. This is a euphemism for bureaucrats. Bureaucrats are hated, and yet there's a time when bureaucrats are necessary. Don't call them bureaucrats. If you call them process agents, well, things work like a clock. Somebody must go around, put oil on the wheels, so it works like a clock. And these are the process agents. And typically, specialists tend to become process agents as the time goes on. Okay, let's go faster. There are some interesting characteristics. I keep hearing that it's very dry. Portugal is very dry this winter. Winters are dry. This is the next slide. Winters are dry. I thought this was it. You can see clearly, winters are clear. Good. Summers, winters are good. Winters are bad. Summers are good. But the situation is very clear. Spring is promising. Fall is threatening. But the situation is foggy. I mean, it's not very clear. And similarly here, winter is depriving, summer is rewarding, but these are factual. Spring is optimistic, fall may be pessimistic, but these are illusionary. These are not. These are foggy. what to look at, strategy. In the summer, you look far ahead, long-range planning. In the winter, you're doing what I call right and left, positive myopia. You just go from quarter to quarter. In the spring, things go like you should follow your nose, and in the fall, you look at your neighbor who may be doing better, but you're not doing well. So we saw this pretty much. Spring is to increase prosperity, summer to expand market share. Summers are expansionistic. So wars that take place in the summer are more of the imperialistic flavor, while fall and winters are survival oriented. So wars that take place in winters are more survival. The advantage, each spring has an advantage and a disadvantage. There's nothing good without any bad. I mean, people say, I don't want to be in winter, I want to be in the summer. That's not true. I mean, you want all of them. In fact, winters are more interesting than summers because summers are boring. Winters are exciting in terms of ideas. Creativity is high in winters. So, fall bears fruit. Winter has new ideas. Summer has crops. Of course, in spring is excitement. Disadvantage, fall is the aging part. Winter is the low profits. Summer is the low creativity. One feels stupid in the summer. And spring is the investment it requires. Competition. It's minimum in the spring because there's a group ethic. Everybody works hard. They don't fight with each other. It's increasing in the summer. It's maximum in the fall. That's when people stab each other. And it's decreasing in the winter because people are stopping up. Ha! Yes, sir. Okay. Relationships. In the spring is the falling in love. In the summer is fun and games. Sex. In the fall is breaking up. In the winter is, somebody told me, it's like after the divorce. In other words, in the spring, wait a minute, Shakespeare defined plays, 4 types of plays. Romance goes with the spring, comedy goes with the summer, tragedy goes with the fall, satire goes with the winter. In the spring, you don't have what you want. This is by definition, falling in love is you don't have what you want. If you have what you want, you're not in love anymore. Somebody said if Dante had consumed his relation with Beatrice, he would have never written the Divine Comedy. So in the summer you have what you want. In the fall you have what you do not want. That is, you're stuck with a relation that doesn't work, or you're stuck with old age, and you can't get rid of it, something that you don't want. And in the winter you do not have what you do not want. Somebody said after the divorce, remember? In the spring you deal with the what. In the summer you deal with the why not. In other words, why change anything? You don't want to change. You're conservative in the summer. In the fall you deal with the how. And in the winter you deal with the why. As a role, philosophers fit in the winter. They often ask the question why. Performing artists fit in the fall because the violin is how he played, not what they play. It's the composer who's the what. Bach did the what. Isaac Stern did the how. And then in the summer you have the administrators. Now look at the coherence of this picture. The composers are, the best adjective for a composer is a romantic composer. He has to deal with what they're going to say. The how is the performing artist, and tragedy is usually tragic performance, you say. And then philosophers are always dealing with the why. Satirical is a philosopher, and administrators are generally comic. There's something comic about administrators. But then on aggression, to come back to the topic of this gathering, I noticed, I measured cyclicity on homicides that increased in deep fall towards the winter. That's when aggression goes up, and then interestingly, this aggression involves knives. The guns increase, even though aggression is not very high here, the guns is maximum in the beginning of the summer. Guns are more associated with having fun. But if you take wars, we heard something this morning, and somebody said that wars should not happen in winter. I don't know why. To me, wars happen both. Wars cycle with half of the frequency. That is twice as fast, like half the period. So there are wars which are winter related. Those are survival wars, and there are wars which are summer related. And those are, I wouldn't say fun wars, but those are expansionistic. I would say that Vietnam, from this point of view, 60s, was an expansionistic type of war, while Iraq seems to me that is more like a survival type of war. General summary of highlights. So, what I want to point out here, we talked about most of these issues. Where are you on the curve? Well, that's the enigma that the Sphinx put to Oedipus. Remember how many feet are you walking on? The rule of thumb for success in all seasons is you determine the season, where you are, and what part of the season you are, the best you can, and then you act according to the spirit of the season, which is typically what happened 2 seasons ago. I'm quoting now Machiavelli, who his grandfather of business affairs, dubious kind of character. I believe also that he will be successful who directs his actions according to the spirit of the times. So, to be in tune with time, just in time, is not only for products, it's for everything. Okay, I don't know whether we have time to go into this. We don't have time. Well, tant pis. So, I thank you. And we can go into discussion later on.